Welcome to Coast. It is Tuesday, January the 18th. I am your host, Jon Cohen, covering the news in our nation this week from sea to shining sea. So I want to begin the program today with a story that took place over the weekend. On Saturday, which is the Jewish Sabbath, there was an attack on a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, where a gunman held 4 people hostage, including the congregation's rabbi. Fortunately, none of the hostages were injured, and the gunman was killed by law enforcement, so major thanks to the brave men and women who risked their lives in this operation. We've unfortunately seen these situations unfold before, and it could have gone much differently. This from the Washington Post. Malik Faisal Akram, a resident of the United Kingdom, held a rabbi and 3 congregants hostage during Saturday services at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, a suburb of Fort Worth and Dallas. The 11-hour standoff ended with the hostages freed and Akram dead. Now, I want to begin by saying that as a Jew, I will tell you, the one thing you understand about anti-Semitic acts such as this is that they occur oftentimes without pattern, when you least expect it, in unlikely places such as Colleyville, Texas, and regardless of who is in control of the White House. I know we were told when the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting occurred in Pittsburgh and the San Diego Synagogue attack occurred that these were because Donald Trump was president. But as we have seen here, anti-Semitism doesn't care about who is in power, Republican or Democrat. It has been revealed that the gunman was a radical Islamist who was specifically in Colleyville, Texas, because Afia Siddiqui, nicknamed Lady Al-Qaeda, a Pakistani neuroscientist, who was sentenced to 86 years in prison for being found in possession of sodium cyanide, as well as documents regarding the construction of dirty bombs, chemical weapons, and New York City landmarks, is being held at a federal facility in nearby Fort Worth. Siddiqui has long been seen as a national symbol of honor and victimization amongst Pakistanis, including the Pakistani media, who regarded her trial as a farce, thus sparking multiple attempts at freeing her through violent means. Siddiqui, and I think this is important to know, has also made numerous anti-Semitic and anti-Israel comments. While at a federal medical center, Carswell, she wrote a letter to the warden to give to President Obama, asserting, quote, "Study the history of the Jews. They have always backstabbed everyone who has taken pity on them and made the fatal error of giving them shelter. And it is this cruel, ungrateful backstabbing of the Jews that has caused them to be mercilessly expelled from wherever they gain strength. This is why Holocausts keep happening to them repeatedly. If they would only learn to be grateful and change their behavior," end of quote. So at this point, I think anyone with a functioning brainstem would look at the attack, if from a purely objective viewpoint, and say, hey, this guy obviously targeted the synagogue because he's trying to free someone who doesn't like Jews, as we just noted in her letter to Obama, and therefore he doesn't like Jews as well. But apparently the Federal Bureau of Investigation doesn't have a functioning brainstem. This from Tommy Taylor over at the Daily Mail. He writes, Republican Lindsey Graham has fired back at the FBI after they appeared to dismiss a terror attack at a Texas synagogue as not being directly targeted against Jewish people. In a series of tweets, the South Carolina senator vented his frustration with the FBI, appearing to ignore the fact that Saturday's attack targeted a religion that has long been subjected to violent and often murderous anti-Semitic hatred. Quote, "It is very disturbing to hear from the FBI they do not believe the hostage takers' demands had anything to do with the Jewish faith," end of quote. From Graham. Now, I want to acknowledge Senator Graham here for always being a fierce ally of the Jewish community and for his remarks in this particular situation, which were desperately needed. Graham's comments, the article goes on to say, Graham's comments came after FBI Special Agent Matt DeSarno spoke on Saturday after British terrorist Malik Faisal Akram, 44, took 4 hostages at the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville, Texas, and held them for more than 10 hours before he was shot dead by agents. he was calling for the release of terrorist Afia Siddiqui from a prison in nearby Fort Worth. But critics of the FBI statement say that a sympathizer of an Islamist extremist choosing to hold a synagogue hostage was not a coincidence. And they are 100% correct. This is what FBI agent Matt DeSarno had to say in a press conference Saturday.
We do believe from our engagement with this subject that he was singularly focused on one issue, and it was not specifically related to the Jewish community, but we're continuing to work to find motive. And
we'll continue to work to find motive. I'm sorry, did IQs suddenly drop off over at the FBI? I mean, I have to stop here for a moment. I've always understood that the FBI is supposed to be the brightest and best of our law enforcement community. I mean, in every movie, like Die Hard, the FBI is who you bring in when the local cops can't get the job done. They're the master investigators who can crack any case. Well, if this is the level of FBI agents we're producing now, who don't know what the motive is behind taking Jewish hostages in a Jewish house of worship, I'll take my chances with Barney Fife. But you see, this isn't about the FBI being so inept at their job. It's not. Their asinine comments are because they don't want to see the anti-Semitic intent of the gunman. The gunman was a member of a minority victimized group. So, of course, we must downplay his intent based on personal hatred and prejudice. And the sad reality of America today is that acts of evil such as this are no longer front page news. I mean, go to the New York Times. This story appears nowhere. It's no longer front page news if the perpetrator is from a disenfranchised group, according to the media. Agent DeSarno only has such a difficult time ascertaining motive because it was a Muslim extremist. And it doesn't end there. Wajahat Ali, who writes for the New York Times, put out this tweet over the weekend. He writes, quote, "You're about to hear some ugly and vicious Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry this weekend from elected officials, commentators, and even mainstream media. Hope I'm wrong. People will use it to divide Jewish and Muslim communities for their political agenda. Don't fall for it." I mean, that's really interesting because I don't recall hearing any Islamophobic comments from anyone over the weekend or today. All I heard was the FBI saying they can't understand why a radical Islamist targeted a synagogue, which, if anything, is kind of anti-Semitic. And question, why do Jews being held hostage by a Muslim, why does that have to be about Islamophobia? It would be like every time a Jewish person committed a crime, say someone such as Jeffrey Epstein or Bernie Madoff, I as a Jew went on Twitter and said, well, here comes a wave of anti-Semitism. Jews being senselessly attacked for simply being Jews has nothing to do with Islamophobia. Stop making this about your supposed victimhood all the time. And it, of course, would not be the perfect end to the worst week of Joe Biden's presidency without Captain Cream of Wheat inserting his 2 cents. Here's your esteemed leader adding to the nonsense of also stating he's not sure why such an attack occurred.
Have you targeted that specific synagogue?
Well, no, I don't. We don't have. I don't think there is sufficient information to know about why he targeted that synagogue, why he insisted on the release of someone who's been in prison for over 10 years, why he was engaged, why he was using anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli comments.
Okay, why was he using anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli comments? I don't know, maybe because he was an anti-Semite? We don't know why he attacked that synagogue? Maybe it's because Afia Siddiqui is being held in a nearby facility in Fort Worth, and he selected a Jewish house of worship as a means, as a tool of leverage? I mean, my God. I have no law enforcement experience, no criminal background, no forensic investigative degree, and I can figure this out in like all of 37 seconds. Unbelievable. But, they don't want to see it. They do not want to see it. Rabbi Scott Hossman Weiss took issue with the FBI statement and warned that wherever Jews were attacked, the entire community felt the effects, especially in the wake of rising anti-Semitic attacks in recent years. He said, quote, "They are us. There's no distinction. Anywhere they are in danger, we are," Hossman Weiss, the founding rabbi of Congregation Shema Kalenu, said Sunday morning. People on social media were also quick to criticize DeSarno's statement, and some even called for the organization to be defunded and eliminated. Quote, just a coincidence that he targeted a house of worship used by this one particular religious minority. A coincidence that seems to happen an awful lot throughout history, end of quote, media correspondent Greg Carlstrom tweeted. Yair Rosenberg tweeted, I am sure the FBI will clean this up shortly, but until then, worth stating the obvious. The gunman did not travel thousands of miles to terrorize some Mormons. He sought out a synagogue and took it hostage over his grievances. That's targeting Jews, and there's a word for that. Sebastian Gorka, the FBI is a joke, a dangerous joke. Data from the FBI revealed that 58% of the U.S. Jewish population are considered to be targets in religious-based hate crimes. Quote, hate crimes are up across the country, but considering that Jews make up just 2% of the American population, and yet nearly 60% of all hate crimes are anti-Semitic, there is definitely an issue going on, end of quote, said Republican Texas Representative Beth Van Dyne. And she's right. As we said before, Afia Siddiqui, who was the gunman's impetus behind the attack, has a history of anti-Semitism, including demanding that jurors in her case be DNA tested and removed, quote, if they have a Zionist or Israeli background. Oh, yeah. Sounds like there's no Jew hatred there. I mean, clearly this guy was just walking around in Colleyville and thought to himself, I have no idea what that building is over there with a giant Star of David on it, but it's either that place or the local Waffle House. I mean, come on. FBI agent Matt DeSarno should either be reprimanded or at least issue an apology for such inane comments. And what's even more shocking is this story regarding the FBI's comments was literally covered by no one except Fox News and the Daily Mail. Why is our establishment media so afraid to chastise members of the government and government agencies when they say asinine things such as this? Or why are they afraid to cover the news stories when it involves a member of a victimized group committing the crime? Why? I've been told by members of our esteemed media establishment that they care about equity and racial justice. Well, if that's the case, then act like it. These stories are worthy of coverage, and I'm not just saying this because I'm Jewish. I'm saying this because any religious or ethnic group which is clearly targeted because of who they are should be acknowledged as such, and it's an insult otherwise. I recently had a non-Jewish friend comment to me. He said, John, I've noticed that you guys always have law enforcement present at synagogue on the Jewish holidays. Yeah, and this is precisely why. This is why I have a gun with me at all times when I'm in synagogue. And it is sad that I have to be armed to go pray and worship in my religion, but this is the unfortunate reality of the world in which we live. But don't insult 15 million Jews worldwide and act as if this had nothing to do with those folks being Jewish when the gunman's sister in arms is an anti-Semitic nut job. Speaking of insensitive statements, Joe Biden's been tossing those around lately like candy from a Christmas parade float, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, I have a query for all of you. Are you tired of establishment media only providing you one side of the story? Ready for a fresh new perspective with hard-hitting facts and truth spliced with humor and sarcastic wit through a conservative lens? Then you've come to the right place. Coast to Coast, the conservative podcast, is available on all major podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. You can also check us out online at Coast to Coast. That's COAST, the number 2, COAST.buzzsprout.com. Please subscribe today. Well, I'm sure everyone listening has seen The Wizard of Oz at some point in your life. But if you are the one person in the universe that has not, the story goes something like this. And this is a spoiler alert for a movie that's over 80 years old. Dorothy and her dog Toto get swept away in a tornado to the magical land of Oz. They meet some charming characters, sing a few songs, kill a wicked witch, and in the end, wanting to return back to her home of Kansas, Dorothy is told if she clicks her ruby slippers together 3 times and keeps repeating, "There's no place like home," she'll end up there, and poof, she does. Well, as life too often does imitate art, the new Democratic mantra is Jim Crow 2.0, Jim Crow 2.0, Jim Crow 2.0. If they say it enough times, well, it will magically become true. As we've already discussed in depth, Joe Biden has been on a propaganda tour of insults with his trusty but brain-dead sidekick Kamala Harris as of late. They've been hurling epithets at Republicans, calling them racists and segregationists and Confederates. But the litany of affronts doesn't end with our esteemed geriatric president, Joe Biden. They're infectious now, spreading around the Democratic Party like a case of HPV at the Villages in Florida. Hakeem Jeffries told us just last week that the Senate filibuster is dripping with racism and slavery and Jim Crow. And now Jim Clyburn, the congressman from South Carolina, is jumping in on the fun with his own diatribe of ridiculousness because apparently a drink of water, as we've been hearing over and over again, is the key to voter suppression.
Remember now, the Electoral College will not kick in until 2024.
Right.
I want to know what's going to happen in 2022 when someone is standing in a line and need a drink of water.
Man, the water thing is just a point of obsession with Democrats. I'm not going to vote today because there's not going to be any free Avion handed out in line. Said no one ever. As I said the other day, this rule simply states that campaigns cannot hand out water to voters in line to influence their vote. They can still drink water. My God. And I know this is so radical that I'll probably be kicked off the internet for even saying it. But bring a bottle of water if you're fearful that you'll die of dehydration while standing in line for an hour. But Congressman Clyburn continues on with some of Joe Biden's shtick.
Did you have a problem with President Biden's remarks? We know that Dick Durbin thought they went too far. Mitt Romney took issue with feeling as if he was being lumped in with the Bull Connors and the George Wallaces of the world. He thought that wasn't fair. What did you make of the president's remarks?
I endorse them wholeheartedly. Look, when we came out of Reconstruction in 1876, we started losing the right to vote. We started losing other freedoms, and we called it Jim Crow. We had a very successful election in 2020. People voted at higher levels than they ever had before. And in reaction to that, Georgia, Texas, and 17 other states started passing draconian voting rights laws. That, to me, is Jim Crow 2.0. And so
now, I want to say something about Jim Clyburn's comments with respect to his own experiences, okay? I know that Jim Clyburn does not truly believe these laws are Jim Crow 2.0 because Jim Clyburn actually lived through Jim Crow 1.0. He remembers the literal voter suppression that took place in South Carolina after the state constitution of 1895 disenfranchised most African American citizens of South Carolina from voting. He remembers there being actual, real-life Bull Connors and George Wallaces and Leighton Maddoxes who beat black people in the streets and terrorized them from registering to vote. I challenge him to show one governor, one mayor, one government official who is beating people in the street, preventing them from registering to vote, hindering their freedom under the Civil Rights Voting Act of 1965 in any way. You can't simply say we're afraid of losing the next election, so we're going to accuse the other side of being racists. We're going to declare it's Jim Crow all over again. I will tell you that in my own community, if I had the audacity to compare what happened at the Synagogue in Texas over the weekend to the Holocaust, I would be ripped up and down by actual Holocaust survivors. Jim Crow, like the Holocaust, was a dark time for humanity, but saying that something like voter laws, which have given no evidence that they have or will result in voter suppression, to a time when people were literally hung from trees while mobs celebrated and took photographs, trivializes the pain these victims went through. And here's another question. If the new voter laws in Georgia are less stringent than those contained in Delaware and New York, fact, look it up, why did voter suppression not take place in those states during the election of 2020? And we all know the answer. This isn't about voter suppression. This is about politics, plain and simple. Jim Clyburn had to bail Joe Biden out in 2020 because Joe Biden was getting his butt whipped by Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders in the primaries, and he's bailing him out again. But people are getting tired of Joe Biden having to be bailed out. And this was evidenced over the weekend on Meet the Press.
This Sunday, Joe Biden's troubled presidency.
Do you want to be the side of Dr. King or George Wallace?
After making a last-minute plea for voting rights legislation,
Will we choose democracy over autocracy? I know where I stand.
President Biden concedes defeat
We miss this time.
when Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema says no to reforming the filibuster.
I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country.
With his poll numbers falling and his agenda stalled, how does Joe Biden prepare his presidency in year 2? My guest this morning.
And wait, there's more. It didn't end there. Chuck Todd, the host with the worst haircut on television, actually did some journalistic work this week and added this montage of Biden's colossal failures.
Something we did get done.
President Biden, after one of the worst weeks of his presidency, touting the infrastructure bill he signed 2 months ago.
There's a lot of talk about disappointments and things we haven't gotten done. We're going to get a lot of them done, I might add.
With the looming failure of voting rights legislation,
I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division.
and his economic plan, Build Back Better, stalled in the Senate.
I cannot vote to continue with this piece of legislation. I just can't.
President Biden has been unable to bridge the wide gap between progressives and moderates in his own party, and is satisfying neither group.
It is about the Democratic Party trying to restore faith with the American people that they actually stand for something.
Democrats need to step up and lead this country.
Many Democrats are calling for a reset, worried a stalled legislative agenda will hurt the party, which is already facing headwinds this fall. And a year after promising a change in tone,
We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature.
President Biden has failed so far to do that.
Do you want to be the side of Dr. King or George Wallace? Do you want to be on the side of John Lewis or Bull Connor?
So much for unifying the country.
Perhaps the president went a little too far in his rhetoric.
Outside of the infrastructure bill, a significant victory, Mr. Biden has been unable to build a small coalition of governing Republicans to make the public effort at bipartisanship that some swing state Democrats have been pleading for.
I wish there had been a more serious effort on the part of Democratic Party leaders to sit down with the other party.
For the third time in just over 3 months, President Biden went to Capitol Hill in person, this time for voting rights.
The honest to God answer is, I don't know whether we can get this done.
And for a third time, walked away with nothing to announce. 1 year in, Mr. Biden has the second lowest approval rating ever measured in the White House.
Wow. So forget about going to NFL playoff games or even the movies. If you want entertainment, just watch the real-time implosion of the Democratic Party. And as was witnessed here, the reason the Democratic Party is absolutely ripping itself apart is because there is garbage leadership at the top. Joe Biden's numbers are atrocious, 33%. According to a recent Quinnipiac poll, he is hugely unpopular, even amongst Democrats, due to the fact that he violated the trust of every single moderate who voted for him. Remember, Joe Biden was elected to do one thing, be the anti-Donald Trump. He ran on normalcy, decency, unity, and wait for it, moderation. He told America time and again that he would be a centrist president because since he was elected to the Senate sometime around the sinking of the Titanic, he was a moderate, middle road Joe. But once he decided to embrace the radical nonsense of Bernie Sanders and the squad, then his own party began to fragment. And there has not been a major political party in greater disarray in the last 30 years than Democrats are right now. And here's Jim Clyburn throwing fuel on the fire, continuing his brutal verbal assaults, this time on members of his own party.
So that these two Democrats have decided that it is much more important to them to protect the voting rights of the minority on the Senate floor than to protect the voting rights of minorities in this great country of ours. This great country, the minorities that made it possible for them to be in the position that they're currently in.
And, of course, Jim Clyburn is referring to Senators Manchin and Sinema. And it didn't end there. You have Congressman Adriano Espaillat from New York acting like he's the enforcer of the Democratic Party. He's going to go out and break some kneecaps, I guess, saying there will be consequences for Sinema and Manchin.
There must be consequences. It's as simple as that. The president calls you and you're going to derail one of his top initiatives, our vision there's got to be consequences for this. They're very, very precise. They fit each state and each leader in very precise ways. And so I'm sure once the consequences are laid out for them, there may be an opportunity for a meeting of the minds.
Man, if I took a shot every time that guy said consequences, I'd be hammered by now. I mean, with party members like this, who the hell wants to be a Democrat? I could play these all day long. It is truly a greater experience than Ringling Brothers to watch Democrats eat one another. But again, it goes back to what I just said. When there's no competent captain at the helm of the ship, the sailors all get drunk and mutiny. And come on, guys, we can't go more than 2 minutes in a group of Democratic pundits without someone throwing out the R word. And of course, this time, it's directed at none other than, drumroll please, Kyrsten Sinema.
Sinema is a Democrat, but she is in many ways upholding white supremacy. You and I both know what the filibuster was originally used for. I don't think I can roll my eyes hard enough, and you kind of just want to say, girl, bye.
Well, I can roll my eyes. I mean, good God. Ah, yes, Kyrsten Sinema is now that most detestable, shameful, ridiculed of all subhuman groups. She's a racist. Truly mesmerizing stuff to watch. Guys, run on this strategy in November, please. It's going to go so well for you. About as well as it did back in November in Virginia. Speaking of Virginia, Ralph Northam, now thankfully the former governor, did an interview the other day where he talked about critical race theory and how Glenn Youngkin is using it as a dog whistle. God, these guys need Carvel so bad.
Critical race theory is nothing more than a dog whistle. We don't teach critical race theory. It's not a part of our curriculum in K through 12 schools. What it also says, and perhaps more importantly, is that anger and fear are very strong emotions. And, I think their campaign was a lot based on that, was out there provoking fear and anger in people, and they responded to it, and the rest is history.
I mean, honestly, how can anyone take this guy seriously on race issues after he dressed up like a Klansman in medical school? And he talks about that as well. Here's Ralph Northam addressing his shenanigans in med school as a grand dragon of the medical student KKK.
At the end of the day, it was a hurtful time. I am glad that Virginians stuck with me. I can tell you that I'm a better person. I certainly understand racial issues much better than I did prior to that episode. And I really think Virginia, more importantly, is a better Commonwealth, a Commonwealth that is more open, more inclusive, and really welcoming to people.
I mean, they stuck with you. You literally walled yourself off in the governor's mansion in Richmond for like weeks on end after the story broke that you dressed up like a Klansman or in blackface. We still don't know which. And I love how outgoing politicians always think they were so great for their constituents, even when they're no longer, not only they're not in power, they're no longer even the party in power. If you were so great, why is a Republican now governor of Virginia, which, let's be honest, is a blue state? And the reason, as we all know, is because people are tired of all the Democrat blowholes who just sounded off in all these clips I just played for you. They're tired of the impotent government with soaring inflation. They're tired of being told the government knows what's best for their children. And they're sick and tired of being told that everyone's a racist, everyone's a bigot, everyone's Jim Crow 2.0. But remember, that's all which remains in the Democratic Party arsenal. That's all they've got. They're like the cast from the 1993 movie Alive, cannibalizing one another in hopes of surviving. All Republicans have to do is sit back, grab some popcorn, and watch the fireworks. Well, that's all we have for today. We'll see you back here on Friday. I am Jon Cohen, and this has been Coast to Coast, the Conservative Podcast. Thank you, everyone.